There's a longer version of not the 10,000 Reasons, but the other song, the second part of it. There's a longer version to that, and I'm going to get you to that someday because it is just quite possibly the best worship song going right now. It's a medley of that and Agnus Dei and old Michael W. Smith. I guess he was the first one to sing it years and years, and a couple of decades ago actually. But we play it sometimes, before service and just background music. But I'm going to get you to that in about 6 weeks. I've got it planned for you. I'll try to put it on Facebook so you can get into it. I don't know if many of you fly very much or anything, and maybe not, but there's an app called Flight Tracker. And if you ever have somebody that is on a plane, and if you know the plane's number or the airport that they're leaving from and maybe going to, you can get on that app or the computer there, and you can type in Flight Tracker, and you can watch that plane. You can watch it from it takes off. You can watch it all the way through to where it lands, and you can make sure that person that was on that plane, you can make sure that they got there safely, and maybe they were averted any weather things that were out there. But that Flight Tracker, and I did this. We took a trip. A few years ago, we flew out of St. Louis, I believe it was, and so sometime before I'd gotten on this Flight Tracker, and I had begun to watch and see what kind of path do these planes take from St. Louis to Florida, and what do they go over our house? Where do they go over? What will I recognize anything? And sure enough, about 30 minutes into the flight, they come over Western Kentucky in the Lakes area. And so because of this app, this Flight Tracker, 30 minutes into the flight, we take off. 30 minutes into the flight from St. Louis, I'm looking out the window. Can I see the lakes? Can I see anything that I recognize? And lo and behold, I didn't see squat that I recognized 30 minutes into it, so I missed out on that. But I tried to, an hour in, you're over Atlanta, and once you pass Atlanta, then you're starting your descent. And so I wanted to know all that stuff and accumulate just meaningless information for no reason whatsoever, just to have that knowledge that's still in my head. So if you're ever flying from St. Louis to Orlando, I know the route you're taking, and I know when you start your descent. But I knew all that. I saw all that. You start this descent so much earlier than what you may think, and then sometimes if there's a holding pattern, you can see the planes just kind of flying around, or maybe having to take a large detour around the city or the airport where they're going to land for one reason or another. And if there's a storm, they have a normal path, but then you can see them jut around that storm and avoid that storm. You can look at this Flight Tracker. You can see the speed that the plane is at. You can see the altitude. Like I said, you can see how fast they're climbing when they get to their peak elevation altitude. When they start that descent, you can know the time that they do take off, the anticipated time of landing, the route that they're on, the speed in the air that they're at, and you can judge all of that stuff, and you can move your little cursor or tap on the plane there, and you can see the flight number, the tail number, the ID of that plane, where it's coming from, where it's going. You can see all of that stuff. You can see the planes as they're really taking off, as they're probably even as they're kind of taxiing out there, it begins, but you can see them in a holding pattern around the city. And you think about that, you've got this big overview of the map there on your screen or your little device, and you're looking down at it. You're looking at it from this perspective as up above. You're looking down at the world, at the activity of these planes just meandering around and organized flying around the country, and you have this upper view perspective of what's going on down below. And I wonder, does God ever see us like that? Does God ever look down at us? He has this upper view perspective of what's going on down below. He knows the atmosphere. He knows how you're traveling. He knows what path you're traveling on. God knows where your starting point was. He knows where your destination. He knows your arrival time, whether it's death or just your arrival time at home this afternoon. God sees that laid out on the app. It has a line drawn for your departure and your arrival, but God can see that in His eyesight, in His mind. He knows the track that we're on. He knows if there's a storm. He knows if there's a detour ahead for us to avoid, or are we just going to stubbornly plow right on through the detour and just go right on through the mess. God knows what we're going to do. And you say, well, man, if I had that kind of knowledge, that would be nice. If I had that information, if I had that easily to access for myself so that I could see the storms ahead, so that I could see the route best for me to take. In the spiritual realm of life, we do have that type of wisdom and knowledge that is available to us. We are not omniscient like God is. We are not all-knowing. But we do know how to conduct ourselves. We do have access to much wisdom and much knowledge. James chapter 3. James has been talking about wisdom since we started his book, since we started the book here, chapter 1. He's been instructing us on wisdom, and we're continuing on with this. And he says, you have all this stuff that you're going through, but God's wisdom is available to you. You have this path that you're on. You have this direction that you're on. You have these things in the way that might distract you. But God says there's wisdom and knowledge that is available to you if you'll just access it. If you'll just turn the little device on, if you'll just turn the app on, if you'll just turn the computer on, if you'll just turn the program on that can assist you, if you'll just dive in, if you'll just open up, if you'll just fellowship, if you'll just communicate with God, there is wisdom and knowledge that is available for us just to get through the daily struggles of life. And we're going to finish up this morning with looking at some things. Are we like this? Is this us? Will these tools help us get through our life in better shape than what we're doing right now? So, James has been talking about wisdom. He said, man, I wish this was available to me. I wish I had this in the midst of my struggles, in the midst of my hardships. I wish I knew how to respond rightly to these things. Now, who should be the ultimate example for your life? Jesus Christ should be the ultimate example for your life. Because think about how Jesus had to respond. Where's a response that we see that Jesus had? He's in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus had a response in the Garden of Gethsemane. If you go through a stressing situation like that, how did Jesus respond in some stressor? How do you respond in a stressor? If you go, Jesus had to stand trial before the Sanhedrin. They're accusing him. He had to stand trial before the high priest. How did he respond to the high priest? Sometimes a lack of response is the best response. Anybody want to give an amen to that? Sometimes you don't need to respond, but you do. Sometimes the best response is no response. Jesus did that as well, didn't he? Jesus responded by not responding at times. He didn't respond to Herod. That in itself is wisdom. He responds to Pilate. He gives truth to Pilate. Why did Jesus give truth to Pilate? Because he is truth. Jesus, we can look at the life of Jesus as an example when he's in a crisis, when he's in a situation. How does he respond? There's wisdom in that. We can learn from that. We can act those same ways. And James is saying wisdom is available to you in your life. Verse 1, he says, and we looked at this last week, but who's he writing this portion of it to? He says, let not many of you become teachers, my brethren, knowing that as such we will incur a stricter judgment. Now, if we see teachers, maybe you think, okay, Sunday school teacher. Okay, the preacher. Maybe we think, okay, somebody that's in leadership at church. Or maybe you think of some other position as when you read teacher right there. But he is first kind of talking to teachers. You might think as a deacon. Like I said, Sunday school teachers. It's really any position. Any position. Any position where you are teaching somebody else, where you are giving instruction to somebody else on how to lead, how to live their life. So if you're a parent, you're a teacher. If you're working with somebody, you have coworkers, you're teaching them. They're watching you, aren't they? They're watching you. Children, they're watching you. Classmates, they're watching you. People around you are watching you. You are a teacher at all times, whether you realize it or not. Somebody says, hey, I know that person. They go to church. They're there nearly every Sunday, and yet I see them out doing this. Must be okay. You just taught them something, didn't you? You just taught something. They are observing that the world is observing your behavior, so we are all teachers, and we are all teaching somebody something. Luke 6:40 says this, these are the words of Jesus. After a pupil has been trained, you will be like your teacher. So we are teaching somebody something. The way we act, the way we talk, the way we conduct ourselves, when we're alone, when we're with others, others are watching. People see that. So we're all teachers. If we remember in our last, the last chapter there, James says, he has said, show me your faith by your works. He says, don't just tell me about your faith or that you have faith, but James says, I want to see you live your faith out. James says, I think there should be some works that are evident of your faith. Because you have this faith, you're going to have these works that are a witness of Jesus Christ for you. Now James says, I want to see the wisdom from your behavior. So James wants to address their behavior. He says, how are you behaving? And remember, James is talking to the first church that's formed out of Pentecost. And he says, you've got some struggles or some things for you to improve on. You need to make some progress in your life. Some of them are walking around saying, I know Jesus Christ. And James says, well, you have no faith. I don't see any fruit from that. And now there's some of them are walking around saying, I've got Jesus Christ. I'm saved. I'm a Christian. I'm a believer. And James says, well, I don't see any wisdom in your life. I don't see you living like a believer. I don't see you conducting your life like a believer. Where's the wisdom that you should be an example of? So the first thing he looks at in verse 13 is humanly wisdom. The wisdom of human wisdom is the first thing he addresses. Who among you is wise and understanding? Let him show by his good behavior his deeds in the gentleness of wisdom. So he says, okay, you say you're wise. As we started out this chapter, he says you're wise. You say you want to be a teacher. And remember from last week, they thought a teacher, a rabbi, an instructor was the top position. They thought that was the pinnacle of jobs. Better than a doctor, better than an engineer, better than anything else. They thought that the position of teacher was the one to be held in the most high regard. So he says, okay, so you say you're wise and you want to teach. You want to hold this coveted position of the day that you think is the most coveted, the most treasured position. Everybody wanted to be this teacher. They wanted to be in this position so that everybody could say, hey, look at me. I'm somebody of importance. I'm more important to you. I have a higher position than you do in the standing of society. People in that day will say, look, we're qualified. We are qualified. We can do this. We can handle it. Turn it over to us. Let us have it. Let us teach and lead. So James says, okay, you say you're wise and you want to teach, you want to lead. James says, that's good. He says, that's good. I'm going to watch and see how you behave. I'm going to watch. I'm going to watch and see how you live your life. James is going to describe human wisdom. He's going to describe human wisdom is of the world, but heavenly wisdom is from above. He's going to walk them through that. We're going to see this played out here. James is going to say that these two wisdoms come from different sources. There's a worldly wisdom, it comes from one source, and there's a heavenly wisdom that comes from another source. If you're operating in a heavenly wisdom, when you get to the last verse, last verse or two of this chapter here, you're going to see how a heavenly wisdom operates, and it operates different than a worldly wisdom. So which one are you operating under today? James is going to show us that. You look at verses 13, 14, and 15, they're showing us something, and the result is verse 16. You look at verse 18 is the result of verse 17. Human wisdom often says one thing and does another. Does that make sense? That makes sense. That's human wisdom. Don't do as I say, don't do as I do, right? Do as I say, don't do as I do. That's human wisdom. Verse 13. And James is saying, we're not going to lean on human wisdom. Again, he says, For among you is wise, whom among you is wise and understanding? Let him show by his good behavior. That's what he's saying. He's saying, you're saying you're good. You're saying you're wise. You're saying you're able to teach. You're saying you're able to lead. You're saying you're able to take control of something. He says, I'm going to see about your behavior. I'm going to see if there's this gentleness to your behavior. I'm going to look at your deeds. How are your deeds? So we're going to see if you have good wisdom, because good wisdom is gentle. James says good wisdom is gentle. It doesn't jump down a person's throat. Verse 14. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not be arrogant and so lie against the truth. So he tells these people, he says, you want to teach, you want to impact, you want to instruct others. He says, but you have this bitterness in you. You have this bitterness, you have this jealousy in your heart. When he says that, he says there are some people in positions. There are people in positions, and if somebody comes in and they want to change something, they want to alter something, they want to do something different, they want them to change the way they're doing something, and what do? They get offended. They get upset over something. You see, James is saying, we've got some people that are in position, and something comes, there's a change that needs to take place, and when they present that change to them, they're upset. They get mad, they get jealous. Nobody's taking my position. Nobody's taking what I'm doing. They get jealous and they get bitter. So James says it shouldn't be that way. You know, I was just thinking about this. This just pops in my head. Does anybody watch that show, New Amsterdam? Okay, so the six of us will get this. There's a director of the hospital. It's a hospital in New York, but he's the director of it. And talking about losing a position or a position becoming obsolete or moving. Some people will hold on to something. Well, I've done this forever, and then this is the way I have to do it. And if you want me to change that, then that's just an insult to me, and I'm going to become bitter, and I'm going to become jealous, and it's going to hurt me to have to transition. Well, are you growing? Is it to grow? Is the need to grow, the need to change, the need to evolve, to do something new because something else has become obsolete? And in that show this week, or last week, I guess, the hospital medical director called in all the staff. He went from the basement to the penthouse, and he called in all the staff. And he said, look, some of you have got some jobs here, and your job is obsolete. There was one guy that was sitting in the basement that was babysitting an old x-ray machine that hadn't been used in 11 years. And the medical director, he comes in and says, wouldn't you like to have a job that has a purpose to it again? It used to be one of the busiest jobs in the whole hospital, but nobody had been down to see him in 11 years. He said, wouldn't you like to have a job that has purpose to it? A guy was watching the gate guard. He used to have to look at everybody's badges when they came through, but now it's all digital. They just scan their badge. He says, I've been sitting in this little hut for years now, and I haven't even gotten out of a chair. And the guy says, I'd like to have a job that has a meaning to it. And that's what this medical director was saying in the show. He says, sometimes you just got to do something different because what used to be done is done differently now. So James is saying, you're going to be upset. You're not acting with gentleness. You're not acting with heavenly wisdom if you get upset because a change needs to be made, because something different needs to be done. Don't be jealous of a position and hold on to it with a clutch of death until it's pried really from your deceased grip there. So he says, don't be arrogant. Don't be contrary to God's truth. The Word is telling us, do not, when we're that way, we have a selfish ambition outlook on life. Verse 15. This wisdom is not that which comes down from above, but is earthly, natural, demonic. So he says, don't be bitter. You need to have good behavior is gentleness. Don't be bitter. Don't be bitter in what you're doing. Don't have a selfish ambition in your heart, because when you do that, you're arrogant and you're living against the truth. This wisdom is not that which comes down from above. He says this isn't heavenly wisdom. When you're operating like that, that's not heavenly wisdom. It's earthly, it's natural, it's demonic. He says it's not. It says it's natural, it's of this world, is what he is saying. It's not heavenly. Verse 16. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder in every evil thing. So since it's natural, since this wisdom he's just been talking about is natural, it's going to be a disruption. It's going to cause disorder. It causes disruption. He also says, it is disorder and every evil thing. And when he says evil, he says not talking about murder. He's talking about being spoiled. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder, there's chaos, there's disruption, and there's every evil thing. It's spoiled. Where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, it's spoiled. Wisdom is spoiled. It's not natural. That spoiled means to mix around with worldly things. The worldly things have spoiled the true wisdom, the good wisdom. So much of the world is mixed in with selfish ambition. So much of our world is mixed in with selfish agenda and desire. So that's earthly wisdom. That's humanly wisdom right there. Now we're going to look at heavenly wisdom. And these come with a few different distinctives right here in verse 17. He says, we won't be able to go through all of these. He says, but the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering, without hypocrisy. Now, if we just look at these right here, James says this is heavenly wisdom. This is the wisdom that we should be an example of. These are some things that we could apply to our life, immediately. Am I conducting myself with any of these things? We're going to look at a few of them. But am I opposite of some of these? James says, he's writing to the church, remember? So this is good for us to read. It's good for us to apply to our life, because James is saying that first church needed to apply this to their life. They were having troubles with this. James says, I see something in your life that you could improve on. Or are we going to hold on to something and say, no, I'm not improving. I'm going to hold on to the way that I've always been. And what did James say just a couple of sentences before? He said, that's not right. He says, no, you're not operating in gentleness. If you're going to say, well, I've always been this way, I'm just going to be this way forever. And if they don't like it, well, then to pooey with them. Right? Right? We know that. We know people. We hear that. James has given us a different route. He's given us a different path, a different track to go on. He says, put this into play in your life. Operate in this way. So let's look. The first one. He says, but the wisdom from above is first pure. It's incorruptible. That means that we just learned that the ones from below here is evil. It's mixed with the world. So he says the heavenly wisdom, the wisdom that comes from above, should be pure. It should be incorruptible. It is not mixed with the world. That's how we should respond. That's how we should act. Pure. Now, you probably already knew this, but how many of you have ever taken like pure vanilla and just tasted it? I mean, you put pure vanilla in cookies, and how does it taste? It tastes good in cookies, doesn't it? And you think if a little is good, and how much do you have to put in those cookies to make them taste good? How much? Teaspoon? Well, if a teaspoon in a batch of cookies is good, shouldn't that whole bottle be good just to drink? Shouldn't it? Pure vanilla, pure lemon, pure mint, pure anything like that? No, it's not good straight like that, but if you mix it with 5 pounds of sugar, pure vanilla is pretty good, right? It's strong. What I'm getting at is pure vanilla is strong, and that's what this is saying. But the wisdom from above is first pure. It's incorruptible. It's strong. There's strength in the wisdom that comes from above. It's pure, it's strong. Why? Because it is not mixed with the world. So it can be strong. Yeah, you can turn there if you want. Psalm 139. Yeah, just turn there. I like to hear your pages turn, or embarrass you if you don't turn your pages. Either way is good for me. Psalm 139, verse 23 through 24. Think about pure. If this is David here. David, think about David. Look at David. He's out there with the sheep. Just imagine David's out there with the sheep. He's out there with the sheep. He's writing the psalm. He's praying the psalm. He's saying the psalm. Nobody else is out there. He's out there by himself. David falls down, falls on his face. He prays these couple of sentences right here. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts. And see if there be any hurtful way in me, and lead me in your everlasting way. Now, what if you came upon somebody and you saw them praying this? You saw them face down, prostrate, or you just heard them praying these words out to God. You would say, hey, that guy's got a pure heart. That lady's got a pure heart. Listen to their prayer. Hear the innocence. Hear the openness. Hear how he's praying or she's praying. They're really seeking God out. They're really wanting God to search them and know them. You'd say, well, that's just a pure prayer. That's a good prayer to pray. He's not in front of a church. Nobody is watching. Nobody's looking. James says that's godly wisdom. That person's operating godly wisdom. It's pure and it's strong. He says wisdom that comes from above does not lash out. It doesn't lash out. It doesn't look for a position of authority. It is concerned with peace. That's what he's saying right there in these things. It's peaceable. And he goes on. He says it's incorruptible. The wisdom from God is incorruptible. It's peaceable. It's gentle. It's non-judgmental. Reasonable is what it means. It's full of mercy, good fruits, unwavering, without hypocrisy. And when he says gentle, it means it's pretty. That's what he's saying. He's saying that about this. He's saying the wisdom that comes from above is pretty. When wisdom from above is played out, is lived out, it's a pretty wisdom. It's a wisdom that attracts. If you look back, it'll be on the screen here, but 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4, you know this. You might even have read it at your wedding. Love is patient. Love is kind. Is not jealous. Love does not brag. Is not arrogant. Verse 5, does not act unbecomingly. So James says wisdom from above is pretty, it's gentle. That pretty means that it has form. There's a form to it. It has a shape to it. So it looks good. That's what he's saying. He's saying when you act with heavenly wisdom, there's a shape to it. It looks good lived out. Here in 1 Corinthians, verse 5, he's saying love does not act unbecomingly. Love does not act unpretty, unbecomingly, without shape. It means it's not pretty. Love doesn't act that way, act without form. Something is pretty, it has a shape to it. It has form to it. And that's what James is saying. Wisdom from above is pretty. It has a shape, it has a form to it. Now, let me tell you this story. This is about the high priest here in the temple. The high priest in the temple, he wasn't seen that often. It's not like a preacher or a pastor or a minister or a clergy person that you see them on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday, or something like that. The high priest was different. He stayed in the holy place for the most part. He was in the tabernacle. He was in the temple most of the time. You didn't get a chance to see this guy that very often. And when you did see this guy, this high priest, there would be this collective gasp when you saw him walk by. You would see him walk by, and we're going to describe how he looked. Nobody could dress like him. Nobody could dress like the high priest because by order of the law, if you were to dress by the high priest, like the high priest, look like him, smell like him, you could get killed. You could be put to death. So it was against the law to look. There was only one person that could look like the high priest in the whole nation, and that was the high priest. Now he has this ephod jacket that he puts on. He has this white, it'd be a blue ephod that goes over the top. He had this white gown that would almost go to the bottom, to the ground, to his feet right there. It was woven. It would have been woven in one piece, and he would just slip it over himself. Now on this on this ephod was this breastplate on his shoulders. Hang off of his shoulders was this breastplate, and on this breastplate was 12 stones. And the 12 stones represented the 12 tribes. So he has this look already about him that he's distinctive. There's something about him. These stones are nice. They're shimmery. They shine. They glisten. They look good. He's dressed good. Around his head would have been this turban. This turban would have had 8 yards of fabric wrapped around his head. And on the front of his turban, on the front of his head, would have been a plaque that would have said, "Holy unto the Lord." So he's already got a distinctive characteristic, this high priest does. He dresses like nobody else. He has a sign above him that says, "Holy unto the Lord." So nobody could look like this high priest. And when they saw it, they would notice it. Look at him. That's pretty. He's got these ornate objects on. He looks pretty. So not only did he look pretty, but the high priest would sound pretty as well. What did the high priest have on his robe that would make a sound? The high priest had these little bells and pomegranates. It would be a bell, pomegranate, that went around his robe. And it made this little sound. So if everything was quiet, just imagine if you're just on the outside of the wall there. Just imagine if you're on the outside of the tabernacle or the temple, and the high priest is inside the tabernacle and the temple, and he's doing some work. Maybe he's making a sacrifice. Maybe he's atoning for your sin. And you can't see the high priest, but what do you hear? You hear a faint tinkle of a bell. Just imagine if somebody was walking outside this wall right there, and he was the high priest. You were on the outside, or the other side of the wall, but yet you could hear this guy making atonement for you. You could hear him walking. And there was this little bitty bell that brushed up against these pomegranates. and there would be this light little dinging sound of a bell. Nobody else could dress like that. You say, that's pretty. He looks pretty. It's a pretty sound. He sounds pretty as well. Everything was quiet, and you could hear him in there working on your behalf. You heard this faint hint of a sound. So not only does he look pretty, he sounds pretty, but he smells pretty. He had a unique aroma about the high priest. Again, nobody else could have this fragrance about them. It was holy unto the Lord as well, just as the high priest himself was holy unto the Lord. Anybody to have this fragrance on them, they could be put to death as well. But his fragrance had this base of cinnamon in it. Now you go into a house, you go into somebody's house and they have a candle burning, cinnamon candle. They have potpourri, cinnamon potpourri, or something on the stove. They're mixing with cinnamon. And what does that cinnamon? It just smells good, doesn't it? I mean, you walk past a bakery or a Starbucks or a bread shop, and they've got some kind of cinnamon roll going in there. And what does your belly say? Your belly says, go, doesn't it? Your belly says, eat that cinnamon roll. So he's got this cinnamon base to him, his perfume, his fragrance. So not only does this high priest look pretty, not only does he sound pretty, but he smells pretty as well. This is how we are to be in heavenly wisdom. The world does not have this. The world does not look pretty. The world does not sound pretty. The world does not smell pretty. But heavenly wisdom says we are to be what the world is not. It's no wonder people don't come to church nowadays, today, any church. Why? Because they don't see us looking, sounding, or smelling pretty. They see us mixed together with the world. And what does that mean? Evil, spoiled. They see us being spoiled in the world. So that's heavenly wisdom for us. Heavenly wisdom should make us look pretty. When we speak, there should be this aroma of Jesus Christ about us. That aroma should be an aroma of love, of caring. We should be, verse 17, we should be pure, peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy, good fruits, and no hypocrisy. Is the wisdom of Jesus Christ seen in your daily behavior? That's the question that James asked. James asked that, and it's still relevant for us today. Is the behavior of Jesus Christ, his heavenly wisdom, seen in your daily actions? What's heavenly wisdom? James gave it to you right there. You can go back and read it. I'm going to ask you to stand. Stand and bow your head. Father, I pray that we would be an example. An example, as James has pointed out, not doormats for people to crusade and run over us and trample us and abuse us by any means. But Father, we can look into your word and see the appropriateness of responses, of when and how to respond. What our average day should be with average people. How our character should look to the outside world, to those that we are meeting for a first time. When somebody gives a report back of us, I hope they say, that's a good person there. That's good people. That's a nice person. I hope they have good things to say about your spouse. I hope they have good things to say about you, your family. So think about that as we have read through this today. Are you an example of any of that? Or have you been mixed together with a little bit of the world? So maybe that's your prayer. And this is a progress that we have to go through. It's not just flip a switch and we're better. But Lord, may we be more like the one who saved us, the one who died for us. May we be more like that in our daily walk. May we be exercise these examples. May we draw people close to you.